In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. His earthly life foretold in Isaiah. He would be born of a virgin, despised and rejected, sacrificed for many, raised and lifted up the King of Kings. Emmanuel, Wonderful Counselor, Prince of Peace, the Lion and the Lamb, a servant, a teacher, a friend, holy God and holy human, simply Jesus.
Well, good morning, NorthPoint. Good to see you this morning, and glad you're here for a new series that we're starting today on, surprise, surprise, Jesus is our series. And in one way, this needs no explanation for why we're doing a series on Jesus. It's kind of like the Sunday school teacher who had her little class of students and asked them a question. She got them all together, and she said, okay, kids, I got a question for you. What runs on 4 legs, is small, really fuzzy, has a big bushy tail, and loves nuts? And none of the kids ventured an answer. They were all too scared to answer. And they had these confused looks on their faces when finally one little boy shyly raised his hand and he says, well, I think the answer is Jesus, but it sure sounds like a squirrel, right? And that's kind of true when you're in church, like the answer is Jesus to all of the questions. This is all about him. We focus on him. And so in some ways, doing a series on Jesus doesn't need an explanation because he is the answer to everything. But I want to give you a little better answer than that. And it comes from something we saw in our beauty series from 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18, which says this, we behold the glory of the Lord, and as we behold the Lord's glory, we're being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory. How do you change? How do you grow? How do you see transformation take place in your life? What does this verse say? How does that happen? It's by beholding Jesus. You grow, you change, you become what God intends for you to be. This is interesting, not by working harder, not by being more disciplined, not by attending church more alone, not by even praying more. How do you change and grow? By seeing the beauty and the glory of Jesus. That's how you grow, that's how you change. Now, I know that we're into transformation. I imagine that you're into transformation. We're in a culture where we like to grow, right? And so we like to learn about things, we like to grow in things. We want to learn how to exercise better. We want to learn how to see transformation on our waistlines. We want to learn to see transformation in our careers. We read self-help books. I want to know how to grow relationally. I want to know how to do communication better. We want to see transformation. Well, how does spiritual transformation in your relationship with God take place? It takes place by seeing Jesus. It takes place by beholding Jesus. It takes place by learning to rest in Jesus and know all that he is and all of his vastness. Here's the thing about Jesus is that, you will never exhaust all that he is done, all that he is doing in his bigness, in his vastness. Jesus is like a galaxy of goodness and beauty. And I've mentioned this to you before, but I wonder if you've looked at these James Webb Telescope photos that they're giving to us, these images from the James Webb Telescope. For a long time, we've had the Hubble telescope. For years, that's been around. And the Hubble telescope is like the flip phone of telescopes. But the James Webb Telescope, this thing is like the iPhone 12 Plus Edition Max, whatever the latest thing is out, right? And it's giving us these amazing images of outer space. Let me show you some of the first images that the James Webb Telescope has given us. This first one is called the Cosmic Cliffs. It looks like an artist painted with oil painting, right? But no, this is an actual picture of outer space from the James Webb Telescope. This is a star birth area in the interstellar galaxy, right? Which means, I didn't even know these existed, but there's a place out there that is birthing stars. Right now, as we speak, this is one of those places. Another image is called Stephan's Quintet. You're looking at right now 5 galaxies. We're in the Milky Way galaxy. You're looking at 5 galaxies in this one photo. In fact, we're told that this original image the James Webb Telescope gave us is 150 megapixels. 150 million megapixels. Your iPhone 12 has 12 million megapixels. This is 150 megapixels, more than 10 times your iPhone 12 image, right? Now, it's not that many megapixels on this screen we have, but that's the original image, right? What it's showing us. Here's another one of this interstellar space. This is called the Southern Ring. Isn't that beautiful? This is an actual picture of space right now, right? And scientists tell us that this ring it's been sending out gas rings for thousands of years. I'm not even going to make a joke about sending out gas rings this morning, but that's what this thing has been doing for thousands of years. And then here's a more recent one. This one's called the Pillars of Creation. This one's a little freaky. It's kind of like something out of Stranger Things, or some sci-fi movie that you've watched with like hands reaching out. Isn't that unbelievable? Now, here's what I want you to think about. No one in the history of the world has ever seen these images quite like this before. And when I start to look at images like this of outer space, I just think to myself, like, what else is out there? What else don't we know? How far does this extend? How many stars are there? How vast and unending and glorious is this thing? And that's Jesus. He is vast, he is glorious, and he is unending. You will never exhaust his beauty and his grace, but by beholding him, by investigating him, by looking to him, you will be changed. In fact, it is the way you see transformation. It's the way you are changed. And so this is why we talk about him all the time, and it's why we're going to spend the rest of this year in this series called Simply Jesus. We're just going to behold him. We're going to look at Jesus, we're going to see who he is and what he is like. We're going to look at some well-known stories, and we're going to look at some stories from his life that are less well-known. Today, I want to start with this. I want us to behold Jesus as the contrarian. Jesus the contrarian. If you've spent much time looking at Jesus' life, or even really a cursory glance of Jesus' life from the gospel accounts, you'll find out pretty quickly that Jesus is a contrarian. That is, that Jesus is often pushing against convention. He's pushing against what we think is right and true, the kinds of things that we value and that we think are normal. He's always just telling you that you're probably wrong, right? That you're probably not thinking about that the right way. For example, some of Jesus' contrariness is pretty easy, like it's pretty on the surface to see. Like for instance, that Jesus pushes back on religious leaders a lot. We're going to talk about that a little more today. But you're like, okay, yeah, Jesus is contrarian, that he's pushing against the religious conventions of his day. We see that. If you were to read Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, his longest sermon that he gives, you would pretty quickly see that Jesus pushes back on our concepts of power and rights and authority. And he tells us things like, no, my kingdom is going to be built by meekness, by gentleness, by turning the other cheek, not by posting cheeky things on social media in rebuttal to other people. That's not the way that it works. So this is the kind of thing Jesus tells us. You kind of know that if you read the Sermon on the Mount. So some of that is on the surface and it's easy to see. But I'm not sure we get how much Jesus pushes back on us. If we will truly behold him and let him be everything that he is, we'll realize that he pushes back on nearly everything we value and think is normal. It's intense, it's serious, and it's not contained to just religious leaders and being Iowa nice, right? The heart of Jesus' contrariness is not just telling you need to be nice like Iowans, right? We are Iowans, so we should feel good about being nice, but that's not just the heart of Jesus being contrary. There's so much more than that. So I want to today consider Jesus the contrarian and allow him to push on us, to challenge us a little bit. And today would be a good day to take notes. I know some of you are note takers, some of you are not note takers, but if you're ever going to take notes, today would be good for two reasons. One, I have 8 things for you in 4 statements. So 8 things, but I reduced them to 4 statements. And I'm not going to be able to exhaust all of those things. And so I want to give them to you for you to think about and ponder a little bit more, to look at the text we're going to talk about. If you're in a community group or a small group, it'll be great discussion within that group to talk about it a little bit more and encourage you to keep contemplating them. Jesus the contrarian, first of all, number 1, he associates with people we avoid. Jesus associates with people that we tend to avoid. Now, look, we all have these moments where we are kind of peopled out and we don't want to see people. Now, some of you are like, Jeremy, that is me every moment of every day. I know, some of you are like that. But for the rest of us, there are times when you just sort of want to break with people, or times when you're like, you're kind of in a hurry, you're busy, and you got to stop in the grocery store real quick. Do you ever do this? And you're like, I'm putting on a hat. I feel kind of grungy. I haven't taken a shower. I hope I don't see anybody that I know. And you're trying to make a quick stop in the grocery store. And then you're in the grocery store trying to get your things quickly, and you see somebody you know, and you're like, down the other aisle. I'm going down the other aisle. I did not see them. I didn't see you. And then you run into them, and you're like, oh, hey, so good to see you. Glad I could run into you here, right? And so you act like you did, but you don't really. You kind of just wanted a break from people. We all have those moments. Like, we all feel like that sometimes. But that kind of thing is far different than building a life that is insulated from certain people. Building a life that avoids certain types of people. Building a life that has a category of people in your head that you look down on and think you're better than. That's a whole different thing, right? From avoiding those people, whoever those people are to you. The odd neighbor, the Muslims that live next door to you, people from another country, people with different religious, political, or beliefs about sexuality that are different than your own. You stay away from those people. Here's the thing about Jesus. Jesus goes towards all of these people. In fact, he himself told us that this was his reputation. Among his generation and among the people that he lived, he said this to them, people on one occasion. They said, this is the way you look at me. Jesus says, this is what you're saying about me. Here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. That was Jesus' reputation among a lot of the people of his day, that he was a glutton and he's drunk, right? And he's going around partying with people, and he's a friend of tax collectors, people despised by the Jews, and he's with sinners. You're associating with the wrong crowd, Jesus, and we're going to insult you for that. Or maybe we're wrong, and Jesus is with the right people. Who are the right people? Well, it seems like to Jesus, the right people are anybody who is a human being, right? That's Jesus' approach. Anybody that will receive him, anybody that will listen to him, anybody that will give him some time, he's willing to talk with them and to befriend them and to associate with them. Because not only did Jesus hang out with tax collectors and sinners, he also engaged with rich people. And he engaged with the religious. And he engaged with prostitutes and people that were demon-possessed and cultural outsiders and the intellectual elite. And he invited children to come and to be with him, right? Jesus pursues everyone that will receive him. There is no discrimination with him. So here's what I take from this. When my life gets very monolithic, when my life gets very insulated, when my life is all the same people, all the same circumstances, all the same situations that are easy, comfortable, and safe, I might be missing something, right? See, while Jesus engages with everyone, he does make a special effort to push against our norms. The people that are easy, the people that we're comfortable around. And he tends to go towards the outcasts. He tends to go towards the disadvantaged. He tends to go towards the awkward. And so in John chapter 4, we have this woman, we don't even have her name. We call her the woman at the well, where Jesus sits down and he speaks with her as his disciples go into town to get some food. And he talks to this woman that no good Jewish male, especially a rabbi, should be speaking to. He could have been seen as making a sexual advance towards her. And when his disciples come back and they see Jesus talking to this immoral woman, the disciples are blown away like, why? What is happening right now? You're talking to this woman. I can't believe you're doing that. And Jesus doesn't care. Jesus, he's like, this is the reason that I came here, to speak to her, to have this meeting with her at the well, right? He makes on another occasion, he makes a Samaritan man who was a cultural religious outsider that the Jews despised. He makes the Samaritan man the hero of one of his most famous stories, the Good Samaritan. That's about a guy that the Jews absolutely hated and despised, and Jesus on purpose makes sure that they know this man is a hero. And it wasn't subtle, it was an in-your-face move by Jesus. He attends dinner parties with really messed up people, so much so that he was accused of being a drunk partier. God, the creator of the universe, walking on this earth, and his moniker is that guy's a drunk partier. And Jesus is like, all right, if that's the way you want to see me. It just seems like he cares more about people than what people think about him. Jesus cared more about the actual people that he created. He loved them than what people think about him. And so he's willing to be misunderstood in order to meet people where they are, and in order to be able to share grace with them, and in order to be able to share truth and reality with them. And I think you know this because that's what he did for you. He met you where you are, with whatever you have going on, and he invited you to his table. He said, come into me, know me, have a relationship with me, eat with me, dine with me. That's what Jesus says to you. And then you find out something, that when you come to Jesus' table, you look around and there's a number of empty chairs around the table where Jesus is sending out invitations to whoever will take them up and come sit around his table just like he did that for you. And so Jesus the Contrarian, he pushes us to consider, first of all, our associations. He pushes us to think about our people, our view of people, who we're around, who we spend time with, who we're willing to be with, the way we look at those that are around us. But while he pursues and associates with all kinds of people, he is equally tough on religious people. This is the second thing we see about Jesus the Contrarian, is that he is really tough on religious people, especially religious leaders. Now look, this has to be confusing for people that lived in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, the religious leaders were close to God. They had life figured out. And all of the people respected the religious leaders. The Jewish people, they respected the Jewish leaders that were over the religion. This isn't exactly true in our day. You read every once in a while about polls about the way that people look at religious leaders today, and the results are not so good. Not a lot of respect. There's been a lot of failure, a lot of mess ups, a lot of struggle, a lot of abuse, all those things. And so in our culture today, we kind of don't necessarily respect religious leaders all that much. Completely the opposite in Jesus' day. They were the elite. They were the closest to God. They had life figured out. Which is so surprising then that when Jesus walks on this earth, his sharpest words were reserved for the religious leaders. Jesus purposefully offended religious leaders so that the people could hear what he thought about them. I want to show this to you and see how profound this is. In Luke chapter 11, if you got a Bible, take it and turn to Luke chapter 11. I have a number of scriptures on the screen for you, but this one I want to read from the text. Luke chapter 11, it's on page 844, and the Bible's in front of you. Jesus gets invited to a dinner party at a religious leader's house. Look at Luke 11, verse 37. It says this: when Jesus had finished speaking, he was doing some teaching. A Pharisee, who was apparently in the crowd, invited Jesus to eat with him. Now, the Pharisees were the most popular religious leaders of the day. There's different types of religious leaders in Israel at this time. The Pharisees were among the common people that they revered the most, that were the closest to God, right? And so a Pharisee invites Jesus to eat with him. So Jesus went in and reclined at the table. Jesus took up the invitation because he doesn't discriminate against anybody. He's willing to eat with anybody and associate with whomever. Verse 38, but the Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus did not first wash before the meal. Now, what's going on there? Well, apparently at this day, before the meal, if you were a religious leader in particular, and you were out among the crowds, among the common unclean people, when you came into your house, into this sacred space, and you're getting ready to eat a meal together with other religious leaders, you needed to cleanse yourself from the filth that you were just around. That's what's going on here. So this doesn't have to do with hygiene at all, like we wash our hands today. This is about ceremonial purity. Us separating ourselves from those common unclean people and making sure everybody knows that we are right with God, we are closer to God, and everything is just as it should be. Now let's have our sacred, holy meal that we have together, separate from the common people. This was not prescribed in the Mosaic law code. This wasn't from God. This is a rule that is added on to make religious leaders feel like they are better than everybody else. And when Jesus walks into the house, he had to be saying in his mind, I'm not washing my hands because I'm not going to be a part of that. And he does it absolutely on purpose. He purposefully offends this Pharisee. Now, you notice the text says that the Pharisee was surprised, couldn't believe that Jesus would do this. Now, the text does not say that the Pharisee said anything verbally out loud about it, right? So he's not making a big deal out of it verbally for all the other people to see. But Jesus, knowing what is in his heart, and since Jesus purposefully didn't wash his hands in the first place, when he sees that the Pharisee is surprised, Jesus is like, all right, here we go. I'm about to bring it. And he hits on a hot button issue for Jesus. And I'm not exaggerating here. Look at what Jesus says in verse 39, just seeing what's happening. Verse 39, then the Lord said to him, now then, you Pharisees, you clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people, did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? But now as for what is inside of you, be generous to the poor and everything will be clean for you. Welcome to the dinner party, Jesus. Glad we invited you to be here. He just jumps on it immediately. And you notice what he's saying to the guys. Oh, you care about purifying yourself from all those common people out there? What should actually be inside of your heart is care and love for them. Helping to introduce them to God and see who God is. You should have invited them to this dinner party and bring them into your house. But no, you got to separate yourselves from them and think that you're better than them. Verse 42, Jesus doesn't stop. Woe to you Pharisees, you give God a tenth of your mint, your rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. He's like, oh, you guys are so particular. You're so holy, you're so pious. You actually tithe, you give God 10% of your herbs. You like cilantro? Do you like cilantro? I like cilantro. We use cilantro a lot. Be like you bringing Sunday morning, here's 10% of my cilantro to give to God, right? As an offering. Like they're going that far. Should you give to God? Do you owe God everything? Yeah. Should we give to God and to his church? Yeah, absolutely you should. And the Pharisees went so far as to tithe on everything that they had because it was external, because people could see it, because it made them feel better. And he said, while you're tithing on your herbs, you neglect the weightier matters of heart, which is justice. God cares about justice and the love of God for people. You failed that. Verse 43, what are you Pharisees? You love the most important seats in the synagogue and respectful greetings in the marketplace. Woe to you because you're like unmarked graves, which people walk over without knowing it. Jesus says you're dead on the inside. Do you think this Pharisee was rethinking his invitation to bring Jesus into his house? I mean, Jesus just brings it for this guy, but it doesn't end there. Verse 45 says, one of the experts in the law answered him and said, Teacher, when you say these things, you're insulting us also. Who are the teachers of the law? This is a slightly separate group. Sometimes they're called scribes. They were the people, sometimes scribes were Pharisees as well, but they were responsible for teaching people God's law, the Old Testament scriptures, and what God had said. And so this scribe says, well, when you insult those religious leaders, you're insulting us too. And Jesus is like, you want some? Okay, I got some for you. That's what he does. Verse 46, so Jesus says to him, I'm sorry that I said that to you and I offended you. No, Jesus doesn't say that. Look at what he says, verse 46. You experts in the law, woe to you too, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift even one finger to help them. Verse 52, woe to you experts in the law, because you've taken away the key to knowledge. You yourselves have not entered, and you have hindered those who were entering. Jesus brings it here, right? And this isn't just barbs and insults from Jesus without a purpose. This isn't like, well, maybe Jesus was just having a bad day. Maybe he hadn't eaten much that day. Maybe his blood sugar was down. He's feeling a little grouchy. He's just on edge a little bit. No, this is purposeful. Jesus is never mean just to be mean. He's mean on purpose. He brings it because the Pharisees' leadership and teaching was a matter of life and death. They were dead people trying to lead other people away from God. And the people needed to hear strongly that their leaders were wrong in this instance. So what were they wrong about? Well, they were wrong in promoting a religion that was based on performance, promoting a religion that was based on rule keeping and earning. Wash your hands like this, honor the Sabbath like this, wear these clothes, pray prayers that are in this way, and a million other rules. Do this, and you're in with God, and by the way, most of you will never be able to attain it. Only we can do it. And so over time, these religious leaders had created a religion that became more and more elite. It put them on the top of the ladder and nobody else could attain to that. More and more they had a religion that was external. It was about what you look like and what you do on the outside. And it became entitled. It became about, we're the only ones that are doing the right thing. We're the only ones that are in with God. And by the way, we basically deserve it because we earned this status with God because we've done all the right things. And so Jesus says this to them in verse 52. Woe to you because you've taken away the key to knowledge. You're not allowing anybody else to come to God. You don't actually have a relationship with God. You don't have this right. And you're keeping everybody else from coming to God as well. And Jesus won't have any of it. In a passage in the Gospel of Matthew, it's another one of these, we call them the woe passages, the woes against the Pharisees. He tells the Pharisees in that instance in the Gospel of Matthew that they are children of the devil. He says, you're spawns of Satan. Is what he tells the Pharisees. Like, I don't know if there's any stronger thing that you could say to somebody to insult them in that instance, right? Why is Jesus so strong on this? You know why he's so strong? He tells us why. He's strong on it because he came to seek and to save the lost. He came to meet people where they are and bring them into a relationship with God. He didn't come to put heavy burdens upon people and tell people, you better do this, you have to do this, you got to get this figured out. And if you become good enough and if you work hard enough, you'll make it to God. Jesus' very presence on this earth is God in the flesh come down to us because we couldn't make our way up to him. And so Jesus is a physical picture to them of, no, that's not the way it works. It works this way. God comes to you. God gives himself for you. Believe in me, trust in me, rest in me. That is the way. That's why Jesus was so angry and upset with those leaders. Look, this is what Jesus is passionate about. This is what he gets worked up about. You having a relationship with him, you having access to him, not by performing or being good enough, but through faith in him. And then as his followers, he's passionate about us creating this environment that is not elite, external, and entitled, but creating a culture that follows him that is humble, that is welcoming to others, that is genuine, and that is grateful to him for who he is and what he has done. Now look, that kind of a place, it's not natural, but it's so much better. And it is Jesus' contrarian way. So look, if these first two things that Jesus gives to us are what he is passionate about, he is passionate about associating with and being welcoming to all people who receive him. He's passionate about religious people not keeping other people from God. He's passionate about you having access to him through faith in him, not through rules and regulations. The next two things show us what Jesus is not very passionate about. He's not very passionate about politics and the end times, right? Let me give both of them to you. I'll give them to you in one statement, and then we'll talk about each briefly. Jesus, as a contrarian, lacked political concern and end times clarity. Two things in his earthly life that he did not seem very concerned with. First, if you look at Jesus' take on political issues of his day, he was surprisingly non-committal. He just basically doesn't commit. When he's asked about paying taxes to Caesar, so Israel, the country that he's in, were occupied by the Roman Empire, right? They're the authorities that are in control. And so Pharisees come to him one day, they're like, we're gonna trick Jesus because we're always trying to get him. And we're gonna ask him, should you pay taxes to Caesar or not? Thinking that if Jesus says, yes, you should pay taxes to Caesar, then the Jewish people will be like, well, you're selling out for them. You're just obeying them, you're not obeying God. And on the other hand, if he says, no, you shouldn't pay taxes to Caesar, they thought Rome will come down on him and they will crush him because he's rebelling against them. So like Jesus is in a no-win situation. Whichever way he goes, he's gonna be in trouble. Do you remember how Jesus responds to this question, should we pay taxes? He says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. And they're like, shoot, we didn't get him again. He always does this to us, right? But Jesus is just non-committal. He's like, look, God's established the authority. He's allowed this to happen and take place. Rome's in charge, so give them their taxes, but make sure you give to God what belongs to him, right? That's how Jesus answers. When Jesus stands before Pilate, who holds Jesus' earthly life in his hands and is questioning Jesus, Jesus says to Pilate, Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is not from this world. It's not about this world alone. He wouldn't let his disciples fight or be aggressive with world powers. He was both respectful and challenging whenever he talked to political leaders that he faced. He didn't put his efforts into establishing a rebellion or even trying to change the political system through external means. He just basically is like, that's not what I'm here for. That's not what I'm all about at this time. Now, we know that if we would read the rest of the scriptures, we would find out some other things about government that are important for us to see. One, we know that government's been established by God. We know that government has an important role in upholding what is good and upholding justice. We know also that we're challenged directly from Jesus to pay our taxes, to submit to the authorities that are in place, and to pray for our leaders like we've done here today in this service. We also know that God does care deeply about justice issues. He just said that to the Pharisees, right? You should care about justice and the love of God. And the government has a role in upholding all of those things. So I take this to mean in the country that you and I get to live in, which was very different than what the people lived in when Jesus was on earth and was talking. I take that to mean, though, that since we have the privilege and the opportunity to vote, we should probably vote. Like, you should probably do that. You should probably care about some of those issues. You should probably investigate those things. I know for sure that you should pray about it and that you should pray for your leaders, again, like we did here today. I think as well it probably means this, that having a career in politics, God bless you if that's you. Right? Because we have a number of government leaders that are here in our church that do have jobs in politics. God bless you. That's a reasonable thing to do. That's a good thing to do. God can bless you and guide you in that. And we do pray for you. But I also know something else. As important as politics are, it's not Jesus' mission. Politics are not Jesus' mission. It's not the primary way people change. It's not the way of salvation. Jesus in his life, death, and resurrection, a kingdom that is not of this world. That is the way. And so personally, I just think of it this way. If I'm spending a lot of time watching the news, getting angry and upset and all hot and bothered, thinking that I have to post things on social media and rip people to shred and share my views with other people in a very aggressive way, more than I am praying for my leaders, more than I am pointing people to Jesus with grace, I've missed something. I think I've missed his heart. And I think I've missed his mission. I also don't want to live in that place with that kind of fear and anxiety in my life all the time, right? So there's big things that are going on, but I don't know how much I'm going to do to affect those, but I know Jesus can. So I take them to him. Jesus, you take care of this. Now, in a similar way to the politics thing, when it comes to the end times, Jesus, you look at his life, he's not very concerned with having clarity about the end times. Jesus' primary teaching that he gives to us on the end times is found in Matthew chapter 24 and chapter 25. If you've read Matthew chapter 24 and 25, here's probably what you're going to come away with. I have a lot of questions. I have studied this, I have read this, I have prayed over it, I've taught on pieces of it before, and when I get done with it, every time I get done with it, I'm like, I have more questions than I have answers. And that bothers me for a little bit until I read verse 36 of Matthew chapter 24, which says this. Jesus says, but about that day, the day of the end times, and the hour, nobody actually knows. The angels don't know. The Son, Jesus himself says, I don't even know. Only the Father knows that. That's reserved for him. Does that give you some reassurance and encouragement this morning? That when it comes to the end times, Jesus is like, look, when I walked in this earthly life on this earth, I didn't even know when the end was going to come. I limited my knowledge of that. The angels don't know what's going to happen. So that's okay. But what do we know? What do we know about the end? We know he's coming back. We know that his return is called the blessed hope. That the main thing Jesus wants you to get about the end is that a blessed hope is coming for all people who believe and trust in him. Now that hope, that blessed hope, is not hope as in, I hope I win the Powerball, right? How many of you bought a ticket for the Powerball? No, don't raise your hands. Don't raise your hands. No. It's not like, I hope that the University of Iowa Hawkeyes turn their football season around and we get a, wishful thinking probably, right? For that actually to happen at least in this year. The kind of hope that Jesus is talking about is a sure, solid hope that is built on the belief in his life, death, and resurrection. That he conquered death once for all people who believe in him, and he's coming back to make everything right and to give you that resurrection life. That's the kind of hope. Yes, hallelujah, I like that. That we believe and that we hope in. Which is why in Matthew chapter 24 and 25, Jesus keeps reminding us in all the discussion about the end times, he keeps saying this, be ready, be watchful. Keep walking with me. Keep resting in me. Keep hoping in me. Don't live in fear. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to have anxiety about it, but rest in me and hope in me. Live for me. Don't fear. Don't speculate. Live in the hope of his blessed return. So look, with these first 3 points that Jesus gives us as a contrarian, it shows us again what Jesus is passionate about. This shows us what Jesus cares about and what's on his mind. And maybe pushes us a little bit to consider, what is it that we get passionate about? What gets you fired up? What gets you really interested? What are you concerned about? And Jesus tells us here, it shouldn't be so much on end times speculation or political power. It's not so much about your religious duty and control, but it's about people. People coming into a relationship with him. And then us living in a relationship with him that is based on humility and genuineness and gratitude. Looking for his blessed hope, his return. But there's one more contrarian idea from Jesus that gets at the heart of who he is. And it's this: Jesus the contrarian values submission, servanthood, suffering, and sacrifice. Think about those words with me for just a second. Submission, servanthood, suffering, and sacrifice. 4 S words we do not like, right? Have you ever done the word association thing before where I give you a word and then you tell me the first word that comes to mind? If we played that game right now with these 4 words, how would that go, right? Submission, no, bad. Servanthood, not for it, right? Suffering, avoid it at all costs, right? Sacrifice, who does that anymore? That would kind of be our word association. They're all bad. These are evil words. These are not God-like words either, right? So I don't really like them, but also this doesn't fit God. God's the creator of the universe. God's strong, big, powerful, majestic. Remember those cosmic pictures of the galaxies that we have? God's like that, big and strong. God can't be associated with these 4 S words that are so below him. And yet this is exactly who Jesus is. It doesn't really make sense. Jesus submitted to his earthly parents. He says to us, the Father sent me, I listen to him, and I always do what pleases him. Jesus submits. Jesus serves. On the night before he was betrayed, he got his closest followers together, he sat them down, he picked up a basin and a towel, and he kneeled at their feet, and he washed successively each of their feet. When he came to Peter, his follower who was never afraid to speak his mind, Peter says, No, Jesus, you can't wash me. You can't do this. And Jesus looked Peter in the eye and he said, Peter, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. I must serve you. Recently, Michelle and I, a couple weeks ago, we went away together to celebrate our anniversary. And part of what came with the place we were staying is that we had a butler at our service, which is weird. I don't know if you've ever had, maybe some of you have butlers. I don't know, maybe you make your spouse be your butler, but like that's not a normal part of our experience. We're raising 5 children. We go away together, we're like, I don't need a butler. The kids aren't here, we're good to go. Like this is, that's it. But we had a butler and every morning he would text us, how are you doing today? What do you need today? And at first I'm like, nothing. I don't, that's weird to have a servant like that. And then after a day or two, I was like, I don't know, I could maybe get used to this. Yeah, could you bring me a drink? Could you pick me up? Could you give me a golf cart ride here? Could you do that? But the whole time it just still felt weird to have somebody like that. I don't know if you've had that experience before, somebody serving you like that. Can you for a second put yourself in the room with Jesus and his followers on that night? You're sitting around the table. And Jesus gets down on his knees at your feet. And he puts your foot in the basin. And he washes your feet. You probably, if you could say any words, you probably would have the reaction Peter had, right? Why are you? No, it's not the way that this works. This is Jesus, God in the flesh, serving us. But not just serving us, suffering for us. After that place in that room where he washed the disciples' feet, he moved on with some of his closest followers to a garden where he prayed and he cried out before God. He was sorrowful and troubled, and he said this, my soul is overwhelmed with a sorrow to the point of death. He had his 3 closest followers with him, and he must have expressed that kind of sorrow to them. But he leaves them and he goes a little bit further into the garden to pray, and when he comes back, they're all sleeping. Could you imagine if somebody says to you, my soul is sorrowful to the point of death, and then you fall asleep on them? We might call that suicide watch, right? And they just fall asleep. Jesus suffered incredible physical pain, we know that, but he suffered emotionally. He suffered relationally. He suffered spiritually alone, separate from any human being that could understand what he was going through. Incredible suffering. He was betrayed. He was denied. He was misunderstood. He was mocked, and yet he embraced it all. He expected it. We could even say that he invited it because he knew it was the way. Jesus suffered, and then his suffering ended with sacrifice. After his trials, his beating, his crucifixion, as he hung on that cross to die, he finally said, it is finished. He gave up his life so that we could be given life. Jesus sacrificed everything for us. Now I realize that on one level, we know that all of these things are true. But I want to remind us of how contrarian this truly is. This is not our way. This is not our society's way. This is not what we're taught. This is not what people value. Do you know how hard we work for most of us in our lives to get rid of all 4 of those things? We pay money to try to get those things out of our lives. We run away from those things. We spend a lot of time and effort to get rid of any suffering, to not have to serve other people. We try to build our lives and our careers and our education so we don't have to serve other people, so other people will serve us. We don't like to submit. We push back against authority and any kind of rules or regulations. And who sacrifices anymore? No, wait, Jeremy, we sacrifice. People, I sacrifice sometimes. You know what we do? You do. We do sacrifice sometimes. You know what we sacrifice? We sacrifice carbs. We sacrifice sleep to exercise. You sacrifice that Halloween candy. You're like, I can't keep this in my house forever. I got to get rid of this. I'm going to sacrifice the candy. Why? Because it benefits us. We sacrifice for ourselves, but think about this. When's the last time you sacrificed for someone else? When is the last time you took a loss so someone else could gain? That doesn't happen very often. It's not natural. It's not normal. It's contrarian. And it's Jesus. It's what he has done for you to change you. And it's what he wants to do in us as his followers, as his people. He wants to create and make in us a people that appropriately submit and show proper respect and honor. A people that serve, thinking of others more than ourselves. That embrace and expect suffering, knowing that it's not wonderful, but God is always working through it. And he's got a purpose and a plan in the midst of that suffering. To be a people that sacrifice and give for the good of others. Do you have much of that going on in your life? If you look at your life and you're honest before God right now, is there much of that going on in you? If so, I say, well done. Keep going. Keep resting in Jesus and keep moving forward with that. If you look at your life and you're like, well, if I'm honest, not much, then I want to encourage you to be careful and to be concerned. But be careful and be concerned, and don't think that the answer, though, is for you to leave this place today and be like, all right, I feel really guilty, I feel bad, so I got to figure out how do I got to find a way today to submit, I got to find a way to sacrifice, I got to find a way to serve, I got to find a way to suffer. God, give me suffering so I will be a better person and be who you want me to be. No, it doesn't work that way. How are you transformed? As followers of Jesus, how do we change? How do we become what Jesus wants us to be? Do you remember? By beholding the glory of the Lord, we are transformed. By looking to Jesus, by resting first and foremost in what he has done, that he is the suffering servant, that he is the one that gave up his life, and that he gave that life up for you to bring you into his family, to give you a seat at his table, to transform your heart and your life. It doesn't primarily come by you saying, well, I got to do this, I better do this, I have to do this now, or I'm not a good Christian. It comes by you looking to Jesus and resting in what he has done. And then he fills you up with who he is and enables you to be all that he has created and made you to be.